Hey, I'm Robert here on Capitol Hill. This is where we cut straight through the headlines. No spin, no fluff, just the real story behind American power, global strategy, military moves, economic battles, and the decisions that actually shape the world. Trump-era policies, dollar flows, Fed fights, trade wars, Pentagon buildups, proxy conflicts. We break it all down with clear logic, hard facts, and zero moral lectures. If you want to know what's really happening and what comes next, before the crowd figures it out, you're in the right place. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's keep watching the board together. The Pentagon is massing significant air assets right now in preparation for what could become a large-scale military operation against Iran, with regime change potentially on the table as an end goal. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is steadily transiting toward the Middle East. Patriot and THAAD missile defense batteries are being rushed forward and positioned at key locations throughout the region. At the same time, non-essential U.S. personnel along with sensitive equipment are being quietly pulled back from bases considered most exposed to Iranian retaliation, and more than 3 dozen KC-135 and KC-46 tankers, together with heavy-lift C-17 and C-5 transports, are pouring into theater as we speak. What started as detailed planning has now clearly shifted into active execution. Iran, though, is not sitting still. Russian Il-76 and Chinese Y-20 cargo planes have been making repeated runs into the country, almost certainly delivering fresh weapons, ammunition, spare parts, and possibly even technical support. Since mid-2025, Tehran has been aggressively stockpiling arms, with a heavy focus on Chinese origin systems. On paper, Iran now fields what looks like a formidable layered air defense network, headlined by the advanced HQ-9B long-range surface-to-air missile, but in practice, that advantage is still brittle and incomplete. Truly effective modern air defenses require deep redundancy, overlapping sensor coverage, real-time data fusion, tightly integrated command links, and serious electronic warfare support. Iran simply hasn't achieved that level of cohesion yet. No matter how you look at it, the situation is now on a razor's edge. American commanders seem to be waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. Hit too soon, and the Iranian people could rally hard behind the regime in a classic rally around the flag surge. Wait too long, and the window closes, defenses harden, momentum fades. Anything less than a decisive move is unlikely to deliver real strategic impact. This is one of those rare historical turning points. Whatever happens in the next few weeks or months will shape the region and the world for decades, long after the people making these calls are out of the picture. Today's conflicts between major states don't just play out with missiles and jets anymore. They rage in parallel in cyberspace, through offensive hacking, mass surveillance, disinformation floods, infrastructure sabotage, and deliberate disruption of communications. The internet itself has become a full-spectrum battlefield. And for ordinary people just trying to follow breaking developments in real time, simply going online can leak far more about you than you ever intended. Your location, your contacts, your search history, even patterns in how you type. Back to Iran. The violent protests and brutal security crackdowns show absolutely no sign of slowing down, steadily pushing speculation about possible direct American military intervention higher and higher. Since January 8th, the regime has enforced near-total nationwide internet blackouts, making it extremely difficult to independently verify the true scale of the unrest, the geographic spread, casualty numbers, or how fiercely the security forces are responding. Even so, these street demonstrations are functioning mostly as convenient political cover, not the real underlying driver for any outside action. Yes, many Iranians in the streets are genuinely demanding political reform and basic freedoms, but the current U.S. leadership has shown time and again that it places very little genuine value on promoting democracy abroad. Look at its handling of Venezuela, Ukraine, the Greenland proposal, and other flashpoints. The pattern is clear. The renewed drive towards striking Iran isn't being fueled by some sudden new crisis, including the protests right now, but by unfinished business from the last direct confrontation. That earlier U.S. operation against Iranian nuclear sites only achieved partial success. An estimated 400 kilograms of uranium already enriched to 60% U-235 were evidently moved to secret locations well before the strikes began. Pushing that material the rest of the way to weapons-grade 90% is technically straightforward. If it's still intact and hidden, that stockpile could yield enough highly enriched uranium for roughly 9 nuclear warheads. As long as that material remains unaccounted for, and Iran keeps even a sliver of breakout capability, the nuclear issue stays wide open. Iranian diplomats in several capitals have been quietly working back channels, floating the idea of returning to negotiations with the current administration in hopes of delaying or avoiding kinetic escalation. Serious concessions on enrichment limits, centrifuge counts, missile ranges, and existing stockpiles might still create breathing space. But Washington's demands have grown dramatically tougher since the last standoff. Today they insist not just on permanently ending all enrichment and slashing ballistic missile numbers, but also on physically removing or downblending the existing highly enriched uranium and completely verifiable cessation of support to regional proxy groups. Tehran has shown zero willingness to accept anything close to that level of surrender, so the risk of military strikes against Iran will stay high over the coming days and weeks. At Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest and most important U.S. installation in the Middle East, with around 10,000 American troops, non-essential aircraft have already been dispersed to safer sites. Fresh commercial satellite imagery confirms the reduced footprint. The exact same drawdown pattern is visible at Prince Sultan Air Base inside Saudi Arabia. These moves do not signal confidence in an imminent diplomatic breakthrough. You thin out your high-value assets when you expect incoming missiles. Al Udeid is less than 300 kilometers from Iranian territory. Shahab 3 class missiles can cover that in about 4 minutes. Clearing the bases is a loud signal that senior commanders are bracing for serious combat. But the deeper question isn't what the Pentagon can do, it's what Washington actually wants to achieve. Clear, politically agreed objectives have to come first. Right now the administration's goals look deliberately vague, everything from limited regime change via internal coup, targeted killings or mass uprising, all the way to coercive diplomacy meant to force Tehran into signing a much stricter new nuclear and missile deal. If the aim is strictly to destroy nuclear facilities and neutralize or recover the missing enriched uranium, then long-range B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, armed with 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator bunker busters, would be the core of the operation. But if the mission creeps toward full regime change, the scale, duration and risk explode. Without sharply defined and politically sustainable end states, military force can easily become an end in itself. Coming off the recent US-led removal of Maduro in Venezuela, some voices are now openly floating a similar leadership decapitation model for Iran, targeting and eliminating a handful of top figures in hopes of paralyzing the system and forcing the survivors to capitulate. But replicating an airborne capture and exfil raid like the one in Caracas faces massive hurdles here. Tehran is deep inland, the distances are far greater than the short coastal hop to Caracas. Helicopters would need multiple in-flight refuelings over hostile airspace, exactly the vulnerability that helped doom Operation Eagle Claw back in 1980. So any overt move would almost certainly mean precision standoff strikes on high-value targets rather than physical snatch operations. Yet even that approach carries heavy downsides. The Islamic Republic is ideologically tough and institutionally deep. Killing or removing a major figure, whether the supreme leader, key clerics or senior IRGC commanders, would cause real shock at first, but it would also feed straight into Shia martyrdom culture, likely unifying rival factions and igniting a powerful nationalist backlash. Moreover, the supreme leader, central as he is symbolically, isn't the single irreplaceable pivot many assume. Iran's system has built-in redundancy. The Revolutionary Guard maintains detailed succession plans to lock down security control and quickly install a new leader through the assembly of experts. A successful assassination would therefore likely produce only brief chaos, while empowering hardliners and rallying the population. Regional politics add still more limits. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, and others are very unlikely to grant overflight rights for strikes on Iran. They know Tehran would hit back at their own cities, ports and oil infrastructure. That narrows America's realistic ingress and egress routes to just 3 corridors. First, the northern route, staging out of Europe, crossing the Black Sea, then cutting through Georgian, Armenian and Azerbaijani airspace, probably without permission, hitting targets, and either doubling back or exiting south over the Indian Ocean. The big risk there is brushing too close to Russian-controlled airspace. Moscow could detect stealth aircraft and quietly pass early warning to Tehran. Second, the Central Corridor, routing through Israel, Jordan and Iraq. With dozens of tankers and transports now massing in Jordan, this looks like the current favorite. Iraq may officially close its airspace, but its radar coverage is nowhere near good enough to reliably track low observable platforms like the B-2, F-22, or F-35. This is the same path used successfully in the previous nuclear strikes. It works, though it's somewhat predictable. Third, the Southern Corridor, approaching via the Indian Ocean. This gives the most operational freedom and the lowest political exposure for Gulf partners. The USS Abraham Lincoln's position in those waters strongly supports this option, and it opens the door to using non-stealth heavy bombers like the B-52 for much greater payload delivery. Force posture and logistics patterns right now point toward a likely mix of the central and southern approaches. This breakdown is not an endorsement of war in any way. It's a cold, interest-driven look at how major powers calculate costs, benefits, risks and timing when core stakes are on the line. No moralizing, just the strategic logic at play. War itself is not being advocated here. The current US leadership may see the risk-reward equation differently. If the mission stays narrowly focused on wiping out nuclear sites and eliminating breakout potential, the operation could remain relatively contained. B-2A penetrations backed by electronic attack, refueling, and fighter escorts might be enough. But if the objective widens to regime change, the entire character of the campaign shifts. Strikes would then likely expand to IRGC command centers, regional headquarters, basage facilities, critical communications nodes, and senior paramilitary leadership, aiming to degrade the internal security machine that keeps the regime in power. That could open a short window of confusion and weakened repression, possibly letting protest movements gain real traction. Yet Iran's track record, including its rapid recovery during the intense 12-day exchange in June, shows the system moves fast to replace fallen commanders, rechain command, and reassert control. Only a sustained multi-week or multi-month campaign, systematically grinding down military infrastructure, security forces, economic arteries, and political legitimacy, could plausibly threaten the regime's survival. Single strikes get tactical results at best. Prolonged attrition is what opens real fractures inside the ruling coalition. Iran's response would scale directly with how existential the threat feels. In a low-level scenario, expect carefully signaled, limited reprisals, rocket or drone hits on US diplomatic sites or bases in Iraq, naval harassment or mine-laying in the Strait of Hormuz, cyber attacks on American targets, all calibrated to re-establish deterrence without triggering all-out war. A medium-level response could mean more overt missile salvos against US military facilities across the Gulf, immediately raising the odds of uncontrolled regional escalation, high-end escalation, an unsignaled massive first strike on American or Israeli assets, or an attempt to physically seal the Strait of Hormuz, only becomes likely if Tehran genuinely believes its own survival is directly and irreversibly threatened. Both sides will therefore try hard to keep their punches below the threshold that forces total commitment. If Israel joins in, its objectives will almost certainly diverge sharply from America's. Should US operations succeed in toppling or badly crippling the existing government, creating even a brief power vacuum, Israeli air forces are positioned to strike ruthlessly and decisively. Within hours of any visible collapse or handover of authority, Israeli squadrons would launch a full-spectrum campaign to dismantle what's left of Iran's military-industrial base: air defense radars and launchers, ballistic missile stocks, drone factories, underground weapons depots, everything. Regardless of whether the new leadership looks friendly, neutral, or hostile. This is exactly what happened in Syria, right after Assad fell. By exploiting that narrow window of maximum disarray and degraded defenses, Israel would effectively erase 2 full decades of Iranian conventional and asymmetric buildup in a matter of days. Any successor government, whatever its orientation, would be left severely crippled, barely able to project power or rebuild a credible deterrent. In strategy, very often it's the patient observer, not the main belligerent, who ends up collecting the biggest long-term gains. I've been your host. If this kind of in-depth, straight-talking geopolitical breakdown is valuable to you, please drop a comment, hit that like button, and share the video with anyone else who might appreciate it. Thank you for listening.